Let me describe a situation for you. It's one not a lot of professionals are living through, but it's rarely, if ever, spoken about out loud. It could be happening in any office, on any team, maybe even yours. So let's just start by acknowledging a reality that plays out in workplaces all over the world. A shared but very unspoken truth. Everyone knows who the problem is. There's a particular leader, a manager, and their behavior is an open secret. It's not a mystery to anyone. The entire team is aware. And so, people whisper. You see, the newcomers, they get a quiet warning. Stories are traded in low voices over coffee or in private chats. An entire unofficial communication network springs up, all designed to navigate this one individual. And yet, on the official level, absolutely nothing happens. The person is still there, the behavior doesn't change, and this strange, tense version of normal just continues, day in and day out. So the question that just hangs in the air, the one that creates so much frustration, is this. Why? If everyone knows, why doesn't somebody with the power to do something do anything? In my own 2+ decades in corporate leadership, I've seen this exact scenario play out more times than I care to remember. I've watched as disruptive individuals were tolerated and sometimes even protected. So what I'm about to share isn't some textbook theory. It's an explanation of the system, just as I've seen it work. To really understand the inaction, we have to push past the emotion of it all and look at the principle that's actually driving the decisions. It's a tough pill to swallow, but you have to see it for what it is. Just let that sink in for a moment. The entire situation usually hinges on that one single word: inconvenience. It's the invisible wall that protects the problem and paralyzes the whole organization. Now, to understand this, you really have to set aside your ideas of what's right and what's wrong. For a minute, you need to see the cold, hard logic of the system itself. There are very calculated reasons for doing nothing. Now, these reasons aren't about morality. They are about systemic pressure that makes doing nothing the path of least resistance for senior leadership. So let's unpack what inconvenient really means here. First, there's a powerful fear of short-term disruption. Getting rid of a leader, even a bad one, creates a hole. It can derail projects, it causes uncertainty. And the system, well, it's designed to prioritize immediate stability over long-term health. The chaos you can see is always feared more than the quiet damage you can't. Very often, the person we're talking about is a high performer in some key metric. Maybe they're the #1 salesperson, or they hold the relationship with the biggest client. Their tangible results become a very powerful shield. The organization literally weighs their toxic behavior against their output, and far too often, the output wins. And finally, there's the simple, cold calculation of risk. A messy firing can be complex, and it can be expensive. It brings in HR, lawyers, negotiations. There's the threat of a lawsuit. From a purely financial point of view, it's often seen as cheaper and safer to just contain the problem rather than actually solve it. So that's the logic of the system. But that logic has a massive blind spot. It completely ignores the real price, the human cost, the organizational decay that's caused by this convenient complicity. And this is the source of that feeling of deep dissonance so many of you have. You see, the company values on the wall talk about respect and integrity, but the behavior that's actually tolerated, the behavior that gets a pass, is the very opposite. And that gap erodes the most critical asset any company has: trust. The fallout from this is predictable, and it's severe. Your best people, the ones who have other options, they quietly leave. The ones who stay, they check out. Burnout spreads like a virus, and a deep cynicism about leadership starts to set in. The decision to keep one person ends up poisoning the culture for everyone. Now, just understanding this doesn't magically fix the problem. I know that. But what it does offer is a really important shift in how you see it. It helps you move your focus from the frustrating individual to the environment that allows them to thrive. Here's the fundamental truth you have to hold on to for your own sanity. Your energy is a finite resource. Wasting it trying to change a person that the system has no incentive to change, well, that is a fast track to burnout and disillusionment. So the thought I want to leave you with is a reframing of the entire problem. I want you to stop asking, how can I fix this person? And instead, look around you and ask a much clearer, much more powerful question. What behavior does this system actually reward? The answer to that question will tell you everything you need to know about where you stand. Let me describe a scene. The meeting ends. The leader walks out of the room, and in their wake, there's a silence. Nobody moves, nobody speaks. There's just this weight in the air, a shared understanding that doesn't need words. Or maybe it's that walk down the corridor where you see colleagues who just don't quite make eye contact, not out of anger, but just to get through the day. That feeling, that's what we need to talk about. Have you ever sat in a silence like that? You know the one I'm talking about. It's heavy. It's uncomfortable. It's a feeling deep down that something is fundamentally not right, even if you can't put your finger on exactly what it is. If you recognize that feeling, you're not imagining things, and you're not alone.
You see, when we're faced with that kind of discomfort, our professional mind kicks in. We try to rationalize it. We search for a label that makes it okay. We tell ourselves, oh, they're just very demanding, or, well, they're passionate. We might even say they're under a lot of pressure, or their style is just very direct. We do this because we're trying to make sense of it, because confronting the alternative is just too difficult.
Now, we have to be incredibly clear about this one thing right from the start. Toxicity does not equal loud. It's not about personality. It has nothing to do with whether a leader is an introvert or an extrovert, or if they have a certain kind of style. Honestly, some of the very best leaders I've ever worked with were incredibly demanding. This is about something else entirely. The real issue here isn't the leader's personality, it's the environment they create. At its very core, a toxic environment is one that feels fundamentally unsafe. And I don't mean physically unsafe, of course. I mean psychologically unsafe. It's a space where people are afraid to take a risk, afraid to speak their mind, afraid really to do their best work. So let's get specific. Let's move from this general feeling of being unsafe and look at the actual behaviors that create it. Over the years, I've seen 4 indicators that show up again and again. And remember, these aren't personality traits. They are observable, repeatable actions that slowly but surely dismantle a team's sense of safety. The first one is fear-driven leadership. When a leader's primary tool is fear, whether it's subtle or obvious, the result you get is not excellence. It's compliance. Your team will do exactly what's necessary to avoid getting into trouble and not a single thing more. And that is where creativity and innovation go to die. Second, and this one is particularly damaging, is the use of public humiliation. It's often disguised as radical candor or just holding people accountable. But let's be honest, when you shame someone in front of their peers, the goal isn't to help them grow. The goal is to demonstrate your own power. It sends a chilling message to everyone else watching. Stay in line. The third behavior is stealing credit. When a manager consistently presents their team's ideas or wins as their own, it does something far more damaging than just demotivate a person. It systematically shatters trust. It teaches your best people that their contributions will be absorbed, not celebrated. And that is the fastest way I know to lose your top talent. And finally, number 4, making decisions based on mood. When a project's direction or a team's priorities can change on a dime based on the leader's personal feelings that day, it creates chaos. Professionals, we thrive on predictability, on data, on strategy. An environment that runs on emotional whims is just fundamentally unstable. And frankly, it's exhausting. Now, these 4 behaviors, they all point to one single powerful principle. This is the lens that makes all of this confusion finally become clear. It is, without a doubt, the most important idea we're going to talk about. If you remember nothing else from our time today, please hold on to this. Toxicity is measured by impact, not intention. Let's just let that sit for a moment. It does not matter what a leader intended to do. The only thing that matters is the result of their actions, the actual effect it has on the people around them. Let me show you how this actually plays out. A leader's intention in their own mind might be to drive results, a noble goal. But if the impact on their team is a paralyzing fear of failure, then the behavior is toxic. The intention might be to be direct, but if the impact is that the team shuts down in silence and withdrawal, the behavior is damaging. The intention becomes irrelevant. The entire purpose of this framework isn't to go around labeling people as toxic. It's to give you a new lens, a clearer way to see your own situation. It's a way to move past all that confusion, the self-doubt, the rationalizations we talked about, and instead evaluate what's happening based on observable behaviors and their very real impact. So taking this new lens with you, this idea of focusing on impact over intention, I'll leave you with just one quiet question to consider for yourself. Looking at your world through this lens, what do you see now? Let me describe a situation, one that I'm sure many of you have quietly lived with. The meeting has just ended. You know the one, the difficult one. And now a very specific kind of silence fills the room. It's not a peaceful quiet. No, it's heavy. It's calculated. You might see colleagues subtly avoid making eye contact, maybe change their path down a hallway just to avoid an interaction. This is a silence that we have all felt. We all recognize this atmosphere. It becomes a predictable, if unspoken, part of our professional lives. We see the behavior, we feel its effects on the team, on morale, on the work itself, and this leads to a very simple and yet a very complex question. If the damage is so clear and so widely observed, why is it allowed to just persist? Well, the answer, as I found over the years, is rarely about that single individual. It's about the structure that protects them. And it's that structure we really need to understand. Now, the first and most common reason is something I call the performance paradox. It's the most visible shield, and frankly, it's often the most difficult one to argue against, because it's built on a foundation of tangible results. You see, the individual in question, they deliver the results. They hit their targets. They're the one who closes that big deal that makes or breaks the quarter. They're the brilliant engineer who can solve a problem that no one else can even touch. And so the organization which measures and rewards these immediate outcomes becomes fixated on them. But those results, they come with a hidden cost, don't they? The bruised team, the stifled collaboration, the slow erosion of the culture. Well, these things are often seen as intangible, a secondary concern to the hard numbers on a spreadsheet. But beyond the numbers lies a more complex and often more powerful set of reasons. These aren't about spreadsheets or quarterly reports. No, these are about relationships, psychology, and the personal dynamics happening within the leadership ranks. For instance, the individual may have a powerful sponsor. Perhaps they were a key hire for a C-suite executive years ago, and that loyalty runs deep. Or maybe they just have a long-standing relationship with a senior figure that acts as a kind of protective barrier. So, to challenge this person isn't just to challenge their performance, it's to challenge their patron. And in most organizations, that is a political calculation very, very few people are willing to make. And then there's the ego of the leader themselves. Think about it. If a leader hired, promoted, or has consistently championed this difficult person, then admitting there's a problem can feel like a personal failure. Removing them becomes a public admission of poor judgment. And so, to protect their own reputation, a leader might just choose to tolerate the problem rather than confront their own mistake. All of this feeds into a broader organizational instinct, an inherent resistance to change. And it's not just simple inertia. Within leadership circles, this is often framed as a pragmatic and necessary business decision. It's a calculation. So when they're faced with this kind of personnel problem, leadership begins an internal calculus. They aren't weighing right against wrong. No, they're weighing one cost against another, the cost of inaction versus the perceived cost of action. There's a genuine fear of what happens if the person is removed. The leaders, they start asking themselves, will this jeopardize our key client relationship? Will it destabilize a critical project right before a deadline? That fear of short-term disruption is often so powerful that it completely paralyzes any action that might lead to long-term health. And then, of course, there are the tangible costs, severance packages, the high fees for executive search firms, the risk of a legal challenge, not to mention the months of lost productivity as a new person is brought up to speed. When you actually list these factors out, the logic of keeping the devil you know starts to sound less like an excuse and more like a financially sound, if cynical, business decision. So, when you combine that intense focus on short-term performance, the human factors of politics and ego, and this deep-seated fear of disruption, you arrive at the core principle that really governs these situations. It's the unspoken truth of the entire system. Let that settle for a moment. This isn't about emotion. It's not about fairness in the way we might wish it to be. It is a cold, rational calculation made to preserve the current state of operations. The system, you see, is designed to protect itself, first and foremost. Understanding this architecture, it doesn't make the situation any less frustrating. but it can shift your perspective from one of pure frustration to one of strategic awareness. The question for you then becomes not why is this happening, but given that this is how the system operates, how do I navigate it? That shift in perspective, it's not the final answer, but it is the beginning of asking the right question.
Let's talk about a situation. I want you to picture a scene. A meeting has just concluded, a decision has been made, and the room goes quiet. You hear chairs being pushed back, people start to file out, but they're not really making eye contact. The decision is official, but nothing at all feels settled.
I'm willing to bet you have. It's a space that, well, many of us learn to navigate very early on in our careers. A room where the most important things are actually said in the silence.
So let's just stay in that room for a moment. Because before we can try to fix anything, we have to understand what's really going on just beneath the surface.
What happens is the leader looks around the room, sees the lack of objection, and interprets that as unity. They declare alignment, and the project moves forward. Officially, on the record, it's a moment of complete consensus.
But you and I both know it isn't consensus, it's compliance. That feeling in the room, it isn't agreement, it's tension. It's the kind of shared, unspoken understanding that the official story is, well, it's a fiction.
Now, this gap between what's perceived and what's real, it comes from a fundamental misreading of what silence in a professional setting actually means.
You know, from our earliest days in the professional world, we're conditioned, either someone tells us or we just learn by watching, to see a lack of objection as support. The assumption is pretty simple. If people really disagreed, of course they would speak up, right?
So, when a team is silent, leadership often defaults to one of these labels. They're too weak to challenge, they're too apathetic to care, or, hey, they must be in full agreement. But these are almost always the wrong conclusions. In fact, they're the conclusions of an inexperienced or, frankly, an incurious leader.
The truth is, employees' silence is not an accident, and it's very rarely about apathy. It's a carefully learned response to a system, an architecture that's built on some very rational fears.
The first pillar of this architecture is the fear of retaliation. And I'm not talking about the dramatic, you're fired kind of moment. It's usually something much quieter. A slow erosion of your influence, getting marked as difficult, having your judgment quietly questioned on the next big project.
And this, of course, creates a very tangible career risk. Every single one of us understands that our career path depends on something called political capital. Voicing dissent on a powerful leader's pet project, well, that's a direct withdrawal from that capital. And it's a risk that most rational people are simply unwilling to take.
And this fear gets reinforced by what we see. We've all seen what happened to that person who spoke up last year. The whistleblower, the dissenting voice. We saw their project get defunded. We saw them get passed over for that promotion. And eventually, we saw them leave the organization. The system is a very effective teacher.
So once you really understand this architecture, you can start to see silence differently. Not as a failure of the employee, but as a different kind of language entirely.
And here it is. This is the crucial shift in mindset for any leader. This assumption that silence means agreement, it's a dangerous fantasy. The reality is that for your people, silence is a tool. It's a tool for professional survival.
It's not a passive state at all. It's an active choice. It's a calculation, made in an instant, that weighs the potential benefit of speaking up against the very real and often observed cost of doing so. It is a survival strategy, plain and simple. To stay silent is to navigate the political landscape. It's how you protect your career, your reputation, and how you preserve your ability to be effective on some future day when it might truly matter more.
And this brings us to the one critical takeaway that every professional, and I mean especially every leader, has to understand.
Let that just sink in for a moment. Silence isn't an absence of information, it is the information. It is telling you, as a leader, that your team does not feel safe enough to tell you the truth. The next time you find yourself in that quiet room, I want you to listen differently. Don't just listen for what's being said, listen for what isn't. What does that silence tell you now?
Let me describe a situation that I'm sure is familiar to many of you. You're on a team, and on that team, there's one person, maybe a manager, maybe a peer, who's incredibly talented, gets results. But there's a friction around them, a tension that everyone in the room can feel, but no one ever names.
Now, in an environment like that, the real damage doesn't show up with a big announcement. There's no single crisis you can point to. No, it starts quietly. It begins with a signal that's so easy to miss until the pattern becomes just, well, undeniable.
Just take a moment and really think about that. Have you seen it happen? Not the people who were struggling. I'm talking about the people who chose to leave. The solid, dependable, highly capable professionals. One day, they're just gone. This is it. This is the first tangible sign that something is wrong. When a workplace becomes fundamentally unhealthy, people start leaving. It's really a predictable, almost inevitable consequence of that unspoken toxicity. But here's what's so critical to understand. This isn't just the normal comings and goings of a business. This is something else entirely, something far more precise and a lot more damaging.
See, the first people to head for the door are almost always your best. And the reason for that is simple. They can. Good people always have options. They have the skills, the reputation, and the confidence to decide where they're going to invest their time and their energy. They just don't need to put up with a dysfunctional culture. So, quietly, they leave.
Now, the departure of your best people, that's just the first act of the story. The next chapter is about what happens to the people who are left behind, because the cost for them is often hidden from view, but it is deeply corrosive. For the ones who stay, whether it's by choice or because they have to, that environment really starts to take its toll. The constant stress of navigating that toxic dynamic, well, it leads to burnout. And at the same time, the very fabric of the team, the unspoken rules of how people are supposed to work together, it just begins to decay from the inside out.
And this cultural decay, this is where the real lasting damage gets done. Psychological safety, it disappears. People stop asking the hard questions. Trust, which is the absolute bedrock of any high-performing team, gets replaced by caution. And real, honest collaboration, it just gives way to self-preservation.
For a surprisingly long time, all of this can stay hidden behind the company's walls. But what happens inside an organization will always find its way outside. The internal reality eventually becomes the external perception. A company's reputation is rarely destroyed by one big headline or scandal. More often, it dies a very slow death. It's a decline that's almost impossible to see day to day, but over time, it becomes obvious to everyone. Think about it. Every good person who leaves takes a piece of the company's story with them. Their departure sends a quiet signal out to the industry. Pretty soon, potential new hires start hearing the whispers. Even clients might start to notice that things feel different. This is exactly how a strong reputation quietly unravels. So, we see this progression, right? First, the attrition, then the burnout and cultural decay for those who stay, and finally, the damage to the company's reputation. It is so tempting to look at these as separate issues, separate problems to solve, but they're not. They are all symptoms of one single underlying process. I want to just let that statement sit there for a second. It's the absolute heart of this whole dynamic. An organization can survive a toxic leader for a very long time, but it doesn't survive unchanged. It is being hollowed out from the inside. And this is the insight that changes everything. The quiet exodus of your best talent, the creeping burnout of those who remain, the slow erosion of trust. These aren't a list of separate fires you need to put out. They are the predictable stages of this slow rot. A rot that's fueled by failure to address the source. And that really brings us to the final and most important question. This was never just about one person's difficult behavior. It's about the collective decision to stay silent, to look the other way. And the cost of that silence, well, it's measured in the talent you lose, the culture you fail to build, and the reputation you can no longer defend. That is the true hidden toll of silence. Let me describe a situation that many professionals quietly live with. It's this feeling, right? This feeling that you're playing a game where the rules seem to change without any notice, where your best efforts, your most logical arguments, they just seem to lead nowhere. Now, this isn't just a tough patch. It's a deep sense of disorientation in a professional world that's supposed to run on clarity and logic. You know the feeling.
You put together a well-researched proposal, and it just gets dismissed. You bring the data, you bring the logic, you might even bring a clear success story, and what you get back is this wall of silence, or maybe just indifference. And that's not just frustrating, is it? Over time, that slowly chips away at your professional confidence. And that is a very real cost. You see, that feeling, that's actually a critical piece of information. It's a signal. It's telling you you're not just in a challenging role, you're in an unwinnable game. It's a system that simply doesn't operate on the principles of fairness or merit that you were trained to expect. The moment you truly understand that distinction, well, that's the moment you start to get your clarity back. Now, what is the natural impulse for any capable, committed professional in a situation like this? It's pretty predictable, isn't it? We try to fix it. We work harder. We find more data. We try to build an even more persuasive argument. Because, after all, that's how we've always been taught to solve problems. You know, this instinct to fix things, it comes from a really deep-seated professional belief. The belief that with enough effort, with enough evidence, with enough sheer excellence, we can correct the dysfunction. We believe we can make things right. But that entire belief rests on one very fragile assumption, that the system actually wants to be fixed in the first place. And here, this is the core of the problem. This is the disconnect. We assume that logic will win, that merit will be recognized. But in a broken system, the reality is something else entirely. It's a different currency. Loyalty is often valued far more than performance. And it's the hidden power dynamics that are really dictating the outcomes, not the quality of the work. And that leads us to the first and honestly the most difficult piece of strategic advice. Do not try to fix a toxic leader or the system that enables them. You simply cannot. Trying to apply your logic to a system that is fundamentally illogical, well, it will only exhaust you. And frankly, it'll expose you to even greater risk. It's a battle that you're not meant to win on their terms. So the crucial point here isn't about giving up. It's not about surrender. It's about making a strategic pivot. It's about shifting your focus away from trying to change the unchangeable and toward controlling what you can control, your own actions, your mindset, and ultimately your own future. This is the move from being reactive to being purely strategic. And this pivot isn't just a vague idea. It's a very deliberate four-step process. Think of it as a path that takes you from an emotional reaction to a strategic action. Action that's designed to secure your career and your future. So let's walk through each one of these steps. So step 1, preserve your core asset. And what is that asset? It's you. It's your mental health, your clarity of thought, your professional judgment. In a toxic environment, those are always the first things to be attacked. Protecting them, that's not weakness. It's your most fundamental strategic priority. Okay, step 2. This requires a pretty big shift in how you operate. You have to stop trying to persuade. Instead, you start observing. You become an intelligence gatherer. You start mapping the unspoken rules, who really has influence, how communication actually flows. You see, you're no longer trying to win an argument. You're just mapping the terrain with cool detachment. And that brings us to step 3, documenting key interactions. Now, let me be very clear about this. This is not about building a list of complaints to take to HR. This is a private, factual record for you and you alone. It's a tool that allows you to see the patterns of behavior free from the emotion of the moment. You start turning isolated incidents into a clear, predictable pattern. And from that pattern comes real understanding. And finally, step 4. This is the most empowering step of all. This is where you really start to take back control. You begin, quietly, methodically, to build your strategic alternatives. You get your professional profiles up to date. You reconnect with your network. You start to see what opportunities are out there. Because remember, having viable options is the ultimate source of power in any negotiation, and that includes the negotiation for your own exit. So all of these steps, they're all leading to one place. A final, critical shift in your mindset. A shift that requires you to really redefine what winning actually means in this situation. And I can tell you, it's probably not what you think it is right now. See, the goal is not to just endure this forever. The goal is not to outlast a bad leader or to be the last one standing in a broken system. The real victory, the true win, is recognizing with absolute clarity that the game itself is unwinnable, and then making a strategic, empowered choice to leave, on your own terms. So I'll leave you with this question to reflect on. In the situation you're in, what is your real end game?
I'd suggest that preserving your career, your well-being, and your future, that is the only victory that truly matters. Everything else is just a distraction from that core mission. This is The Effective Professional, where we prepare you for reality, not illusions.